The Radiator is a live abstract performance console. It's designed for real-time abstracts for laser shows, either in a performance situation or it could be sequenced externally via MIDI commands on a DAW or a laser show track. It's got a ton of I/O, including control voltage, MIDI, TCP/IP, video out, audio in and out. And it's really designed to be one more instrument in your arsenal for video, for laser, for vector synthesis, or even for some music creation. Looking at the back of the Radiator, we've got power, we've got audio inputs, we've got the control voltage in and out for the low frequency oscillators. We've got an XY output, which can be used for audio. It can be used for driving oscilloscopes for vector synthesis and rescanning. It's got ILDA out, the standard DB25 with direct connection to ILDA compatible laser projectors. It's also got MIDI in and out. It's got USB for controlling things like laser docks and laser cubes. It speaks TCP/IP for driving network DACs like the EtherDream DAC. And the Radiator can also be controlled by sending TCP messages or MIDI messages in. And it's also got 1080p 60 frames per second HDMI video out for use in situations where it's not safe to do laser projection. For instance, if you're doing Radiator work and you want an immersive feel, you can do laser projection up above the crowd and then use the same output for video and project that on the audience for simulated crowd scanning in a way that's safe and compliant with FDA regulations, so there's no safety concerns. The Radiator is laid out like a synthesizer because it really is just a synthesizer, except it's optimized for lasers and eye candy instead of for music. It's got a series of modules. This is color. These are LFOs, LFO 1, 2, and 3. These are your two shape generators. Think of them as wavetables. And then you have a transformer for adding additional effects on the abstract that you're creating. And this is a cloner, so you can take an abstract, you can reproduce it multiple times and perform transformations and motion sequences on those clones. Here you have the main controls for walking through the menu system. And then up here, you have a master size, a master output intensity level, a blackout for instantly killing laser output. And then down here, you have your presets. And presets are banks and pages. Each bank has 10 presets. And you can scroll through the banks by turning the page knob. Radiator uses show files. Each show file can contain up to 1,000 presets, and the Radiator can hold internally multiple show files. And the idea is, if you're going to go out and do a gig, you can create a show file with abstracts that match the tempo or the style of music that you're going to be performing with. And that way, if you're using presets during your show, you can guarantee that you're hitting presets that work well with the music that you're performing to. So getting started with the Radiator is extremely simple. We've programmed in a lot of shortcuts just to make things a little bit easier, and I'll talk you through that. To get started, if you hold down Shift and Reset, it brings the Radiator back to its default state, and that is a single circle coming out with Shape Generator A, and the color mode being HSV versus RGB, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's start. We've got a shape, as you can see here. We'll go back to the circle. And now let's do some transforms to that circle with one of the LFOs. So I'm going to take LFO 1, and I'm going to select the waveform. And you can see as I'm turning the shape on LFO 1, it's telling me here what waveform I have selected. So we're going to use a sine. And I'm going to turn the level of the sine wave up a little bit. Here it's set to about 50%. And I'm going to turn the speed to 20 Hertz. And now we need to take the output of this LFO and assign it to one of the controls on the shape generator. The Radiator routes signals dynamically. We're doing it all digitally behind the scenes, and we can do signal routing in a one-to-many configuration. So you take one LFO, you can route it to a single thing, or you could route it to multiple things and do some pretty amazing effects. But let's start simple. If I hold down select for this LFO, I'm telling the radiator that I want to take the signal out of the LFO and route it to another control. So I'm holding down select, and then I'm going to turn size in this shape generator. And the more I turn the size control while the select button is pressed, the more amplitude of the signal coming out of the LFO will be applied to this control. And you can see the circle is beginning to grow and shrink, and that's being controlled by the sine wave coming out of the LFO. And I can turn the level of the LFO up more to increase its influence on that shape. And I can speed up and slow down that sine wave, and you can see the size change react in accordance to what's happening here. And there's a lot of waveforms that are built into these LFOs. This is a triangle, this is a ramp, up, ramp down, square, and some other effects. And as I mentioned before, since you can do a one-to-many routing, I can also take the LFO signal by holding down select again and turning the hue knob. And you can see now that that circle is changing color in accordance to its size. And if I slow it down, you can see it's purple at the large, and then down to yellow when it's smaller. And I can increase the speed of this, and that color stays locked because it's being driven by the same LFO that's controlling size. So what we've just demonstrated is a very simple abstract that's just coming out of shape A. And so let's talk a little bit about making more complex abstracts. The radiator has two shape generators, and these shape generators can influence each other to make more complex and more interesting shapes. So I'm going to turn on shape B now, and you can see the size of the circle that we're working with has increased. That's because both shape generators are currently running at the same frequency. So if I start changing the frequency of shape B, you can see we're starting to get kind of more standard expected laser abstracts. And the radiator does a couple of things to try to make things a little bit easier for you to create stable and interesting shapes. Because if you're in a live performance setting, you don't have a lot of time to find a harmonic. And so one trick here is shape B has a sync button that always tries to find harmonic relationships between the two shape generators, just to make things much faster and easier for you. And shape A, instead of having a sync, has an invert button, which changes the draw direction of this shape generator. So you can change the abstract that you're working with. So now that we've got an interesting pattern going, let's try to add some complexity with the LFOs. So I'm going to take LFO 1, and I'm going to hold down select and turn the size control on shape A. So now I know that when I start using this LFO, it's going to change the size of one of these circles. So if I turn level up a little bit and then add a little bit of speed, and you can see the waveform here that's coming out of the LFO, you can see that the abstract is now doing things that are a little more dynamic and a little more interesting. We can also start adding some color to it by taking that same output and again sending it to the hue value, or the hue control. And now let's take LFO 2 and hold select down and do the same thing to size from shape B. And you see we start getting something that's really dynamic and really interesting. We can also take LFO 3 and send it to value, which is intensity, and then we can start doing some kind of traditional chopping effects and kind of further increase the complexity and hopefully visual interest of the abstract that you're working with. So one of the things that we realize is when you're in a performance situation, every second absolutely counts. So we built in some shortcuts to make things a little bit simpler and a little bit faster to use. And the key to one of those shortcuts is the reset button here. And reset can do a number of things. If you hold down reset and turn a knob, it will bring that knob back to its default state. You can also hold down reset and hit select on any of these modules, and it will bring that entire module back to the default state. Also, if you hold down reset and hit shift, it will bring the entire radiator back to the default state. So if you're building abstracts and you get lost and you start just making noise and confused about what settings are set, you can do a very quick reset and bring you back to basic state and pick up with a new and fresh abstract. So we really designed the radiator so it's not a carpal tunnel machine, so it's quick and easy to use. We've also baked in acceleration curves for these controls. So the faster you turn them, the larger the values will increment. We also have a shift control here that if you hold it down and turn a knob, you're fine tuning the frequency on the knob instead of jumping. So if you have a shape that's almost stable, but you just can't get it, hold down shift and then turn things, and you're turning things in a much more controlled fashion. The LFOs can either use internally generated waveforms, and each one's got a number of different waveforms, but also they can be bypassed and controlled externally from these CV inputs. So if you have modular synthesizers or other oscillators that you'd rather use, you can plug them into the CV ins or CV outs and skip the internal waveforms, which gives you even more flexibility on the type of effects that you can make. We can also bypass the LFOs and use CV inputs to accept an OLA signal in. So if you have another DAC or another source of laser generated signals that you want to use, you can use these to input that in real time and convert that laser pattern into HDMI video with the radiator. And also, because at that point the radiator thinks that it's just coming internally from one of the shape generators, you can perform all the standard radiator effects. So if you're doing a show and you need to put a logo up for some reason, a band name or an advertiser sponsor or whatever, you can take that input from another system, run it through the radiator, output it back to laser, perform rotations, color mapping, audio modulation to that, and video out. So it becomes extremely flexible and extremely powerful when you're integrating this with other systems. Unlike most laser control systems, the radiator can use both RGB and HSV color spaces. In RGB, these top three controls become red, green, and blue, exactly as expected. Or you can switch the radiator over to HSV, and these controls then become hue, saturation, and value. So by hitting select, you can bring up the color menu, and I'm just going to change value from RGB to HSV. And now this control becomes hue, and this control becomes saturation, and this control becomes value or intensity. And that provides for some very interesting color effects when these controls are being driven by one of the LFOs. The radiator also has some baked-in color effects, like the very traditional chopping, and we'll just turn color modulation on, make sure that we're in chop mode, and then these controls become choppers for the color oscillators. And when you combine that with ramp waves, you get some really fun effects, very traditional old school laser effects that you might see at a laserium or some other performance. But there are some other very interesting controls as well. And if you look through the menu, we have multiple modulations types, X wave, Y wave, X, Y, and hue-based effects. And these are chopping patterns. So Y wave, when you activate these modes, these three controls become parameters for these modes. So in this case of Y wave, if I turn the depth to 100, you can see the pattern starts to blank, and I can slow the speed down and then start adding multiple instances of that wave to get some really kind of unique and fun color effects. And these, of course, can be driven from any of the LFOs or from the audio input or MIDI or other controls. So it just becomes extremely powerful and very easy to get unique and interesting effects. So one of the really fun effects that I like to use is using an LFO to control the size of a circle, and then do some hue effects on it, and it becomes just like really psychedelic and really unique and really fun. So I'll talk you through that process. It's very, very simple. So I'm going to hit select to get to the color menu, and then I'm going to select radial hue here and turn modulation on, and then make sure that fade is set to 100% here, and then we'll add some length, and we'll make sure that saturation is up. And then we can start doing this really kind of fun stuff. And I'll just increase the draw speed of that circle. And then let's start making it really psychedelic. So I'm going to take another LFO, and I'm going to combine that with the offset control here and start doing this really fun and really unique stuff that the Radiator is really good at. And this can also be controlled through audio modulation or external CDs or MIDI. So it's just really fun and really simple to start making cool stuff to music. One of the nice things about the Radiator also is if you hold down Shift, these control buttons here become a tap to tempo. And if you hit it 3 times in accordance to the music, it'll lock onto that beat. And so it's really easy. Instead of controlling oscillator speeds manually, it's really easy to hit beats for live performance. The Radiator's got a lot of onboard effects also that are kind of at the end of the signal chain that allow you to do some really non-standard and cool effects. So let me show you how that works. We've got the 2 LFOs here, and then we have a transform section that has some 3D manipulations and some other cool effects. So I'm going to hit select in the transform section. And currently there's no type selected. So I'm going to set work type here. And as I'm doing that, you can see some effects are kicking in. And I'm going to set this to 3D size 2. So type selects the work type, and then the work control here selects the amount of effect that will be applied to the shape. So I'm going to turn this work command quite a bit. And now what we've done is we've just applied a 3D transform to this shape. And if I start doing some rotation, you can see that this image has been worked around the outside of the sphere. And what's really fun is you can take these controls and you can also control them via an LFO or an external CD or MIDI or kind of anything, or even with an audio input. So if I take this LFO, hold down select, and add that to warp, I can provide some really cool kind of fun dynamic effects that could be running to the beat of the music or to any other thing. And I can also use that to control color or size or kind of anything that we want to do. And this is really fun running this in audio reactive mode, because it's just like running this, the beat just makes everybody happy. And there's a lot of interesting effects that you can do in here. There's also a clone section, so let me just kind of make this a little less chaotic. Clone kind of does what you expect it to do. It can take one shape and make multiple copies of those shapes, and then you can perform some manipulation or some motion on those. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, and I'm setting a clone type, and then this controls the distance between the clones. And there's quite a number of clone options here, and some of them actually have built-in motion paths. And these motions, the speed of these motions can also be controlled by an LFO or again by audio or CD or MIDI. So it just is a way to create really dynamic shapes and motions very quickly and easily. So again, in this transform section, not only do we have these cool warp effects, but we also have rotate offset, which creates some orbit effects when you're doing these master rotations. And it also has some axis tilt effects, just to provide a little bit more dynamic effects to your abstracts. And you can see, not only do we have the 3D warp, but we also have a perspective being applied to these rotations. So they're actually orbiting instead of just rotating around themselves. And it just becomes really dynamic and just kind of unexpected and beyond what a lot of abstract concepts can do. And again, any of these controls can be controlled by LFOs or by control voltage or any of the other sources. So there's a lot of flexibility here. And now if I hold down reset, I can hit these controls and zero them back without having to turn them all the way back manually, just to make things a little bit faster and easier when you're in performance mode. So I've talked a couple of times about the ease of patch creation and presets. And so I'll just do a really quick demonstration of how easy it is to save a preset. So I've got the Radiator back into the default state. And what I'm going to do is just create a really simple example, as we've done before, with this circle that's being driven by an LFO. And I'm going to add a little bit of color to it. So now that I've created this preset, I want to save it. Or now that I've created this abstract, I want to save this preset. So all I do is hit Shift and Enter, and all the modules light up, which tells me that when I save this preset, I'm going to save the configuration of every single module. And you can turn these off and only save certain modules or groups of modules. But in this case, we're just going to save all of them. And all I have to do is just hit a button here, and now that preset is saved. So if I want to change to a different style of abstract, like this, I can save it again, and this new preset is saved. And then to call those presets back up, just hit the button. And so we can very dynamically create, edit, save, and call up presets. And you can do this absolutely in real time, absolutely during a performance. It does not interfere with your flow at all. And it makes it really easy if you're jamming or if you're performing and you create something that goes well with the music or something that you've never seen or you want to use it again, you could save it off in real time and then call it back later. It's just really, really quick and easy. And I think that's a real advantage of the Radiator over many other abstract consoles, is the ability to have banks and presets and show files and presets. It just makes it so much easier and so much faster to hit the music and to control with. The Radiator has controls for color balance, both on the extreme end and the low end, for biasing to make up for the fact that many laser projectors don't come on at the right color on the low end. And it's really important to do as much white balance and color correction as you can, because it'll make your abstracts look much better. So typically when I start with the Radiator and then start with a new projector, that's the first thing that I do. And all you have to do is hit Shift to get to the menu section here, go to Output and hit Enter. And then we have controls for red, green, and blue levels. And you can see right now that the laser output is kind of a pinkish purple. And I know that we need to add more green to bring that up to white. So I can move to green level here, and then just hit value, start adding green until the laser output becomes a nice white. We also have red, green, and blue bias to make up for the low end modulation. The laser that I'm working with right here is quite good and has nice low end modulation, so there's really no correction that I need to do there. Also, in the same menu, we have X and Y scale. And these are the maximum size that the Radiator can output. So it's really important to set that to make sure that the laser is only projecting into a safe zone. We also have X and Y offsets. So if you're not totally perpendicular to a projection surface, you can move this around. And we have X and Y flip. I do a lot of laser show programming, both Timeline and Radiator. For me, what's really best about working with Radiators is the fact that you can instantly call up presets, you can modify presets, and then you can save them back absolutely instantly with no interruption to your performance flow. Which means while I'm performing or while I'm jamming at home or just relaxing, I can create abstracts, I can save abstracts, I can put them in my show files, I can use them later. Also, these show files can be exported to a thumb drive. They're human readable text files. You can exchange them with other people, share, you can study them. They're absolutely very, very easy to understand because all they are is just knob settings and values. One of the things that is also really fun is while you're controlling a Radiator via MIDI, the console is still live. So if you're doing laser shows on a Timeline, you can still do a performance aspect. You can send MIDI commands to the Radiator for major musical events, and then you can drive the Radiator live between those events. So you get this really nice kind of hybrid between pre-programmed and human live show. It makes it kind of impossible to get lost because the Radiator will self-direct every time it gets a MIDI command. And so your performance success is going to be much higher. I did a performance recently with a modular synth artist, and having a set of presets that were selected to go well with her music just meant that it was very quick and easy for me to be up on stage performing with her. There was no sweating, there was no nervousness or anxiety because I knew the Radiator presets I had selected would work well with anything that she was doing. She loved it, and it was just a very successful performance just because I trusted the Radiator, I trusted the presets that I was using, and I trusted the ability to create, to tear down and put a new abstract up very, very quickly and in sync with the tempo and style of music that she was making. So one of the things that we designed the Radiator for is integration with both the modular synthesis and the vector synthesis communities. And so for that, we have an XY out here that's great for driving things like oscilloscopes, for rescanning or Vectrex. We've also given the Radiator HDMI out, and that just opens up a really interesting application for the Radiator in video synthesis. One of the really cool and interesting things that I'm beginning to see happen with Radiators is integration with classical liquid light shows. Integration with shows involving video feedback, where you're either pointing the camera at laser projection and then video projecting back over the laser to get interesting feedback loops. And I do a lot of that. It's really fun and organic and kind of melty and more space filling than a traditional laser abstract might be. But because we've got HDMI out, lots of people are also taking this output and running it through video effects processors and then projecting it either with or without laser. So the Radiator just becomes a really interesting tool that fits into a lot of artistic communities. And it's just been really fun to say, here's a tool, here's how it works, here's a lot of documentation, and here's our standards and our protocols and our MIDI mapping. Take it, run with it, and do something really beautiful and unexpected with it. And I'm beginning to see that happen, and it's just really, really gratifying to come across somebody who's using the Radiator in ways that I've never imagined, or making abstracts that I've never imagined. At one laser community recently, I saw somebody using the Radiator with a theremin, and that was really cool to see them, waving their hands in free space and the Radiator abstracts changing in accordance to that. Just like that sort of stuff really brings a lot of joy to this thing that we've made. So, I mean, it is absolutely important when using a Radiator with the laser to pay attention to laser safety regulations, laser laws, and to take good care of your laser projectors. These little things are expensive and they're just wonderful little things. We have baked into the Radiator some scanner protection. And if you look at the output menu, there are some output filters that we wrote and modeled based on some DSP work that we did to help control your scanners. But really the best thing to do is to watch the laser output, and your laser will generally tell you if it's unhappy because the projected image will start to break down or you see some noise or glitches. But I absolutely recommend using these output filters. They smooth out the motion and the large jumps that your goggles will do, and help protect and keep your laser projector from melting down. You know, there are some basic laser regulations that you need to be aware of. It's all, you know, don't point lasers at people, don't point lasers at aircraft. If you're in the US, make sure that you have an FDA/CDRH variance, make sure that your laser projector is also variance. And any reputable laser vendor will help you get your variance and help you with the paperwork and help you with laser safety. The Radiator is really fantastic for live abstracts. Traditionally, laser abstracts are very, very hard to do live because you're chasing harmonics and you're trying to create an interesting shape and tear that shape down when there's a musical change, and it's extremely difficult. The Radiator solves a lot of that problems and becomes very, very good at a live performance space for abstracts. There's definitely other utilities for doing pre-programmed shows, which are fantastic. There are great laser software for doing things like button mashing and getting interesting light out very quickly. I certainly prefer the more subtle art of laser abstracts than just blasting beam soup everywhere, but there's a lot of tools and there's a lot of various art forms that you can do with lasers. This is what works for me. It's certainly not the tool for everybody, but I think it's a very important tool, and I think it's another tool in the palette for laser art. And especially when this tool is used in combination with other tools, it becomes something that's very powerful. And I think at the end of the day, it's our job to make a really interesting and beautiful show for an audience. And I think that this is one tool that helps realize that, and it certainly can be used with other platforms, with other software, with other hardware, and just think of it as one more color for your laser show palette. I do a lot of performance work with multiple radiators, and I kind of use them as a laser DJ console. And what's really nice is we have a level control here that can fade a radiator in and out, but you can still get a video preview of what abstract you have as you've done. So I can have one radiator displaying a pattern while I have a preview monitor on the other radiator, and I can find an abstract that goes well with the music or goes well with that pattern. And as soon as I do, I can fade one radiator out while cross-fading the other radiator up, and it becomes a way of getting smooth transitions between abstracts. I also like to use radiators with scan-through effects like lumia and diffraction gratings because they become much more space-filling than just a traditional laser abstract, and it provides more dynamic and more visual interest. Also, as I mentioned before, it's really fun to use radiators with video synthesis or video feedback because that provides another very, very interesting visual element. It becomes more unpredictable, more organic, more space-filling, and more trippy, and I think that makes shows much more interesting to the audience. When you get started with a radiator, it's really important to go to the manual. Because we do things in kind of a non-traditional style, it takes a little bit of time to kind of really understand how the radiator works. But once you understand how signal routing works and how color routing works, it becomes really fun and really easy to get started with things and to make very complex things. But really, I think it's important to remember that to do signal routing, you have to hold down select while you're routing the signal. And the radiator's default color space is HSV instead of RGB. And so a lot of people get confused because they're turning the color knobs and the color's not working as expected because they're in the wrong color space. But it's very easy to hit select here and check your color space. And if you're not in the color space that you want, it's very easy to move the menu down and change the mode, and then it will work as you expect. So we get a lot of questions about that, but it's actually quite simple. Check the manual out or give us a call. We'd be very, very happy to help get you up and running. There's a lot of communities that are using radiators. Kind of the official support is our neoncaptain@gmail.com email, but there's also a pretty active Facebook group called Neon Captain Radiator, and there's a good community there. I spend a lot of time in there answering questions and doing support as I can. Or you can certainly reach out to X-Laser to get some support. But we're just always standing by. We want you to be really successful with this thing that we've made. We're very proud of this thing that we've made. We want you to love it, and we want you to just do some amazing things that we never even imagined were possible. So we'll post lots of videos, send us pictures, tell us stories, and just let us know what you're doing with these things, and we really know that you love them, because I think they're really fantastic.